In the archives of Mesopotamian temples, thousands of clay tablets preserved the voices of humanity itself. But these same tablets spoke of something greater. Between the lines of accounts and contracts, woven through epic tales and legal codes, ran golden threads of divine presence. The gods were everywhere in Mesopotamian life, not as distant abstractions, but as living forces that shaped every sunrise, every harvest, every beat of the human heart. High above the cities of mud, brick, and human ambition, towering ziggurats reached toward the realm of heaven, their stepped walls climbing like earthly mountains toward the dwelling places of the divine. These were more than monuments. They were bridges between two worlds, sacred architecture that allowed mortals to touch the eternal. The pre-dawn darkness over Uruk was absolute, broken only by the soft glow of oil lamps flickering in the great ziggurat's highest chamber. Here, in the sacred room that crowned humanity's first skyscraper, a lone priest prepared for the most important moment of each day, the greeting of Anu, the sky god, as he awakened with the sun. This daily ritual, performed without fail for over 1,000 years, embodied the relationship between divine and mortal that lay at the heart of Mesopotamian civilization. The gods were not distant creators who had withdrawn from the world they made. They were immediate, present, intimately involved in every aspect of human existence. They dwelt in the cities themselves, their temples serving as earthly palaces where they received the worship, offerings, and consultation of their human subjects. Anu, whose name meant simply sky, presided over the heavens from his ziggurat in Uruk. Each morning, as the first light touched the stepped walls of his earthly mountain, priests performed the rituals that ensured his favor would shine down upon the 50,000 souls living in his city's shadow. They offered bread baked from the finest grain, dates sweet with the essence of the palm trees he protected, beer brewed according to recipes that had been perfected over generations of divine service. But Anu did not rule alone. Beside him stood Inanna, the goddess whose complexity reflected the mysteries of existence itself. She was the goddess of love who blessed marriages and brought fertility to both field and family. Yet she was also the goddess of war, fierce in battle and terrible in her wrath against those who opposed justice. In her, the Mesopotamians recognized the fundamental truth that creation and destruction, love and conflict, life and death were not opposites but part of a single divine reality. Inanna's portion of the great ziggurat complex hummed with different energies than Anu's serene sky realm. Here young brides came to seek blessings for their marriages, their offerings of flowers and honey placed before statues whose eyes seemed to sparkle with divine life. Here warriors offered prayers before battle, asking for courage and victory from the goddess, who understood that sometimes love required fierce protection. Here farmers brought the first fruits of harvest, acknowledging that all fertility flowed from her divine generosity. The rituals dedicated to Inanna were among the most elaborate in Mesopotamian religion. During her great festivals, the entire city of Uruk transformed into a stage for sacred drama. Processions wound through the streets, carrying statues of the goddess, adorned with gold and lapis lazuli. Musicians played harps and drums, while singers chanted hymns that told of her journey through the underworld and her triumphant returns to the land of the living. These weren't mere ceremonies, they were cosmic events that renewed the divine forces that kept the world alive and flourishing. Beyond Uruk, other cities honored their own patron deities with equal devotion. In Ur, rising from the marshlands near the Persian Gulf, the great ziggurat of Nanna dominated the skyline like an artificial mountain crowned with moonlight. Nanna, god of the moon, governed the rhythms of time itself. His cycles determined when festivals would be celebrated, when crops should be planted, when travelers should begin their journeys. The priests of Ur maintained careful astronomical observations, tracking the movements of their divine patron across the star-filled sky and recording his phases on cuneiform tablets that would guide human activity for generations. The worship of Nanna involved rituals of particular beauty and mystery. On nights when the moon rose full above the Iraqi plain, silver light flooded the ziggurat's highest chamber, where priests performed ceremonies that connected earthly time to celestial eternity. They offered milk white as moonbeams, silver jewelry that caught and reflected Nanna's light, and prayers that acknowledged his role as the divine timekeeper who measured out the days and years of human life. In Lagash, along the banks of a now-vanished tributary of the Euphrates, the god Ningirsu presided over the cycles of agriculture that sustained Mesopotamian civilization. He was the deity of the plow and the harvest, the divine force that turns scattered seeds into fields of grain. Farmers throughout the region looked to Lagash for guidance about when to plant and when to reap, trusting that Ningirsu's priests understood the cosmic rhythms that governed fertility. The festivals of Ningirsu were timed to the agricultural calendar, great celebrations that acknowledged humanity's dependence on forces beyond their control. During planting season, elaborate processions carried sacred plows through the streets of Lagash, while priests chanted prayers for favorable weather and abundant crops. At harvest time, the first sheaves of grain were brought to Ningirsu's ziggurat, as acknowledgement that all plenty flowed from divine generosity. But perhaps no city embodied the intimate relationship between divine and mortal more powerfully than Nippur, the religious heart of Sumer, where Enlil, lord of the air and storms, held court. Enlil was the god whose breath became the wind, whose voice spoke in thunder, whose power could bring life-giving rain or devastating flood. He was both creative and destructive, the divine force that embodied the awesome power of nature itself. Nippur's massive ziggurat, larger even than those of Uruk or Ur, rose from the plain like a mountain built by human hands, but dedicated to powers beyond human comprehension. Its stepped walls climbed nearly 200 feet toward the sky, each level representing a different aspect of Enlil's domain. At its base, chambers were dedicated to his role as bringer of fertility and growth. Higher up, rooms honored his authority over weather and storm. At the summit, in a chamber that seemed to float between earth and heaven, the most sacred rituals acknowledged his ultimate power over life and death itself. The priests of Enlil wielded influence throughout Mesopotamia because storms respected no city boundaries. When dark clouds gathered on the horizon, when lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the plain, all the cities between the rivers looked to Nippur for guidance about what the god intended. Favorable omens brought relief and celebration. Unfavorable signs prompted urgent rituals designed to appease divine wrath and avert catastrophe. In Eridu, the most ancient of all Mesopotamian cities, Enki presided over the sweet waters that sustained all life. He was the god of wisdom and craftsmanship, the divine teacher who had given humanity the knowledge of irrigation, metalworking, and building. His temple complex sprawled along the banks of a sacred lagoon, where fresh water bubbled up from underground springs, a tangible sign of his presence in the world. Pilgrims traveled from across Mesopotamia to consult Enki's oracles, seeking divine guidance for complex problems that required both wisdom and technical skill. How should a new canal be dug to ensure proper water flow? What rituals were needed to purify a city after plague or disaster? How could justice be administered fairly when human motives were complex and contradictory? These questions went beyond simple worship. They required divine wisdom channeled through priests who understood both sacred knowledge and practical affairs. The ziggurat complexes were more than places of worship. They were entire sacred cities within cities, employing thousands of people in roles that ranged from the purely religious to the intensely practical. High priests and priestesses, often members of royal families, oversaw the great rituals that maintained harmony between divine and mortal realms. Below them, hundreds of specialized clergy performed daily offerings, maintained temple buildings, and preserved the sacred knowledge passed down through generations of divine service. But the temple complexes also functioned as economic centers that coordinated much of Mesopotamian urban life. Temple workshops produced the finest crafts, textiles woven with patterns that honored the gods, metalwork that captured divine symbols in bronze and silver, pottery decorated with scenes from sacred stories. Temple schools trained scribes not just in writing and mathematics, but in the theological knowledge needed to interpret divine will and natural phenomena. Most importantly, the temples served as the economic hearts of their cities, managing vast agricultural estates that stretched far into the countryside. Temple lands were worked by farmers, who understood that they labored not just for human masters, but for divine patrons, who would ensure fair treatment and abundant harvests. The grain, dates, wool, and other products of these estates supported not just the temple personnel, but the entire urban population through a complex system of redistribution that balanced religious obligation with practical necessity. The festivals that honored these patron deities were among the most spectacular events in the ancient world. During Inanna's great celebration in Uruk, the entire city became a stage for sacred drama that lasted for days. Processions wound through streets decorated with banners and flowers, carrying statues of the goddess, adorned with jewelry that caught sunlight like captured stars. Musicians played instruments crafted specifically for these occasions, while trained singers performed hymns that had been perfected over generations. These festivals weren't mere entertainment. They were cosmic events that renewed the divine forces that kept civilization alive. The rituals reenacted the mythic events that had created the world, ensuring that the patterns established by the gods at the beginning of time would continue to operate in the present. The community's participation in these ceremonies wasn't optional. It was essential for maintaining the relationship between divine and mortal that made urban life possible. The sacred stories that emerged from this rich religious life would influence human culture for millennia. Tales of gods who descended to the underworld and returned transformed, myths that explained why the seasons changed and the rivers flooded, legends that explored the relationships between divine justice and human suffering. These weren't primitive superstitions, but sophisticated attempts to understand existence itself. Central to this developing mythology was the recognition that the gods, despite their power, were not perfect beings free from conflict and emotion. They loved and fought, created and destroyed, made wise decisions and catastrophic mistakes. In their divine struggles, Mesopotamians saw reflections of human experience magnified to cosmic proportions. The gods' capacity for both benevolence and wrath, wisdom and folly, justice and favoritism made them comprehensible to mortals who wrestled with similar contradictions in their own lives. This understanding shaped the development of divine kingship, the political system that would govern Mesopotamian cities for thousands of years. Kings ruled not by right of conquest or inheritance alone, but as representatives of the gods on earth. Their authority derived from divine approval, and their responsibilities included maintaining the religious observances that ensured continued divine favor for their cities. The earliest kings often served simultaneously as high priests, combining political and religious authority in ways that made them intermediaries between divine and mortal realms. They were responsible for ensuring that temple rituals were performed correctly, that festivals honored the gods appropriately, and that the moral and legal codes that governed urban life reflected divine will rather than mere human preference. As night settled over the cities of Mesopotamia, as oil lamps flickered to life in ziggurat chambers throughout the region, the daily cycle of divine worship continued. In Uruk, priests offered evening prayers to Anu and Inanna. In Ur, astronomers tracked Nanna's path across the star-filled sky. In Nippur, Enlil's servants listened for divine messages in the whisper of wind through the ziggurat's highest chambers. In Eridu, sacred springs bubbled with Enki's eternal wisdom. These weren't empty rituals performed by primitive people who feared forces they couldn't understand. They were sophisticated religious practices developed by urban societies that recognized their dependence on powers beyond human control. The gods of Mesopotamia embodied the forces of nature, the mysteries of existence, and the moral principles that made civilized life possible. Their worship created communities united, not just by practical necessity, but by shared reverence for the divine forces that sustained all life. Under the eternal stars that had guided humanity since the beginning of time, the people of Mesopotamia rested peacefully in their cities, confident that their patron deities watched over them through the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new rituals, new offerings, and the continuation of relationships between divine and mortal that had been carefully maintained for over 1,000 years. But tonight, in temple chambers throughout the land between the rivers, the gods themselves seemed to rest, their divine presence palpable in the flickering lamplight, their eternal wisdom preserved in the wedge-shaped words of countless hymns and prayers. The spiritual foundation of civilization was complete. The realm of the gods had been established on earth, and the sacred architecture that connected heaven and earth would stand as humanity's testament to powers greater than themselves for millennia to come. Our journey through the corridors of time continues as the spiritual unity that bound Mesopotamian cities begins to fracture. Discover how patron deities became rallying points for conflict, and how the world's first wars between cities would reshape civilization itself. The age of divine competition awaits.